Hello, welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is an attorney, William Mahan, and Bill has a law office in Campbell, California. He has been practicing law for 30 years. He has a master's in taxation degree that he earned from Golden Gate University. And he also received a JD degree from Santa Clara University. Bill's practice focuses on estate planning and probate and business planning. So welcome, Bill, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
So today, Bill and I are going to be talking about why you need a will. It's one of those topics that we all seem to put off. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to do something about it. Today is December 29th, so it's a good time for making New Year's resolutions. And so when you see this show, we hope that you'll take it seriously and put it on your list of things to take care of if you haven't already for 2009. And also 2009 is going to be an important year probably to revisit the issue anyway, as we're going to talk about. So let's get on then with the first question. So, Bill, do you have any guess about what percentage or portion of the population doesn't have a will?
Well, I've heard different numbers over the years, and I've heard numbers as low as 15% of people who would benefit from estate planning actually have it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, hopefully it's a little higher than that today, but I'm sure it's most people who are adults who would benefit from estate planning don't have it in written form.
Yeah, so they just haven't gotten around to it for whatever reasons. Okay, we're going to talk more about that. So I guess the next question is, why do you think people don't have a will?
Well, I think, as you said, most people realize it's something they should do. Mm-hmm. So in the back of their mind, it's one of those things I should do, but they don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I have to do my will today. So I think that's part of it. It's just they know it's something to do, but they don't think about it on a regular basis until something happens. Oftentimes that's something that motivates them. But there are other reasons people don't do it. I think sometimes it might be cost. They think it costs too much money to do it. And compared to a lot of other things, I don't think that's necessarily true, especially since it does so much for a person. Mm-hmm. Also, I think there can be family reasons for it. Sometimes there are issues in a family, and they're not really talked about very much. And when you start talking about your estate plan and what you're going to do, if you're talking to family members or a spouse or whatever, it sometimes leads to issues, and that people don't really want to go any further with that, so that can become a problem.
So you get sort of like a little conflict that comes up when you start talking about getting into the details. I think this is something I'd like to do in my will. Well, I don't know about that.
Yeah, just disagreements sometimes, and then once you have some disagreement, then it sort of stops.
Yeah.
And I think another thing is it's just sort of human nature to not want to think about dying and not want to think about what happens when you die. And in many respects, I think the opposite is true. If you do estate planning of some sort, you actually feel better about things. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to live longer or die soon. It means you've taken care of some things that could make a difference to your family, and so it actually is sort of a convenience that you feel like you've done something worthwhile and taken care of some things.
Yeah, so you can get a little peace of mind maybe by actually having this in place, and so that if something does happen to you, then at least your family isn't going to be in the lurch related to that. Of course, there are other things that other than just the will itself, but it's a big part of the whole picture.
Right.
I guess the other thing that we talked about was that there are some people that are afraid that if they get a will, it means I'm on my way out.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's part of the human nature part of it is if you don't think about it, maybe nothing will happen. If you start talking about it and thinking about it, maybe something bad will happen. That's maybe
so if we don't deal with it, if we don't deal with it, we're immortal, and then otherwise we're facing our mortality.
Right, and then you get the call from the emergency room at the hospital at the last minute. The kind of, people who have practiced in estate planning as long as I have, certainly have those situations where you have the last minute cases, and hopefully you can get things done at the last minute.
hopefully have some time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what does eventually motivate people to go ahead.
Right. Well, that's one of the things, illness.
Yeah.
People are finally thinking about things like what happens, after I'm gone, because there's something that happens to them or something that happens to a family member. A lot of the people who come to see me have lost a friend or a family member and maybe have even experienced what happens, when people don't take care of their estate planning. And they want to avoid that. There usually are big things that happen in people's lives. They get married. That motivates people to think about these things. They have children. That's a very big motivation factor for people because they're concerned about, making sure their children are raised and educated. And if they're not there to do it, then how does that happen? Who's going to be, in charge of their children and raise them? And so these are issues that become quite important to people when they start having a family. So that can motivate people. And sometimes I have people come to see me because they're about to leave on a vacation. And they realize that they're going to get on an airplane and maybe their whole family's getting on an airplane together. And that's a motivating factor for them because of the reality that they need to maybe take care of things before they go on a trip. So it's things like that. Sometimes it's kind of short notice because they don't think about it until something comes up.
Right. Okay.
Now, another thing that motivates people to do it in a more timely fashion are people like advisors, tax advisors, accountants, financial advisors. These are people who kind of help people think about things that they should be taking care of and do it in a more...
Professional pin holders.
Yeah, and so they get it done in a more timely fashion if they're getting that kind of advice.
Yeah. And the reason why we do to some degree is because there are these issues that we know. I mean, to me, a big thing is just thinking about children. I mean, it's one of the first things that I ask for people because it adds a whole element of urgency, especially when they have younger children. And if something happens to both the mother and the father, or these days there are an awful lot of people who are single parents. And so to see to it that that they have been provided for is really high on my list of priorities before even talking about some of the financial considerations and so forth. Okay, well, what happens if you don't have a will?
Well, when I meet with people, the first thing I talk to them about is, do you have any kind of estate planning already? And if they say no, I say, well, that's what you think. You actually do. It's called the California Probate Code. You just don't know what it says. But if you die without any kind of an estate plan, then it's called intestacy. You die intestate, meaning no will and no testamentary document. And all the rules for your estate then are laid out in the California Probate Code. And it depends on what you own and how large your estate is and what your family situation is as far as what's going to actually happen, and it's all laid out in there. It's not really, too weird what it says. Usually, if you're married, the property goes to a spouse. If you have separate property, if it's not all community property, we'll talk more about what this stuff is later. But if it's separate property and you have children, it can be divided between children and spouse. If you have parents, it can be divided between spouse and parents. But it's basically stuff that people don't really know. So that's the key to it. Something's going to happen, but since you don't know what it says, you're not really, necessarily going to get what you want.
Yeah, you're not in control then.
Right.
You've handed the control to the California legislature, and what they are guessing might be best for your family may not really, in fact, be the case.
Yeah, it may not be what you would have wanted to do, and that's why any kind of an estate plan, even a simple will, is a good thing to have, because then at least you start to take control over what happens, after you pass away.
And I guess